Hi, I'm Priscilla. They called it brunch, a simple family get-together at my sister's new house. But minutes after I sat down, my fiancé texted me, "Don't speak, your chair is wired." Everyone smiled. Too much. My mother laughed, too loudly. And when the slideshow started, there I was, edited, humiliated, turned into a punchline. They rewrote me in real time, not just my words, my memories. My name was erased from the will. My gift was claimed by someone else. My voice, filtered through a narrative I didn't approve. How long had they been rehearsing the moment I'd finally break? And what happens when I choose not to? The driveway was lined with boxwoods trimmed so precisely they looked plastic. Soraya slowed the car as we pulled up, both of us noting the floral arrangement placed artfully by the front steps. "She hired a florist for a brunch," Soraya muttered under her breath, and I gave a tight smile. That's not just a florist, that's curated perfection. I reached for my purse, exhaled slowly, and opened the door. Callista met us on the porch with open arms and that too-polished grin I had memorized since high school. "You made it!" she sang out, hugging me just a little too long, her perfume suffocating. "You look great, Priscilla, like you've finally found your glow." Soraya tensed beside me, but stayed polite. "It's good to see you, Callista." The front yard looked like it had been staged for a home magazine. Every petal in place, every chair on the patio facing the light just right. There was nothing accidental here. It screamed control, something Callista had mastered since birth. And as we stepped through the threshold into her newly renovated house, I felt the first static of unease crawl up my spine. Inside, everyone was already seated, every seat filled, conversations softly humming, wine glasses half raised as if our late arrival was expected, like they had rehearsed this. "Your seat is here," Callista gestured to the very center of the table, flanked by two massive floral arrangements and facing the wall-mounted security camera I instantly recognized. "We thought it would balance the photo symmetry," she added casually, waving to a young woman holding an iPad, probably the event photographer. Imogen, our mother, chimed in. "Only Callista could make brunch feel like a gala. It's so tasteful." She didn't look at me once. I didn't respond. Instead, I adjusted my expression. Neutral, pleasant, unreadable. I took in the room. Tightly controlled conversations, eyes darting to me, then away, and plates already halfway through. This wasn't brunch. It was a pageant, and I was the unwilling contestant. As I moved toward the assigned seat, my phone vibrated against my palm. I glanced down. "Don't speak. Chair's wired. They want a meltdown." I blinked. The message was from an unknown number. I turned slightly toward Soraya. Her eyes met mine for a second, sharp, knowing, and she gave the slightest nod. She got the same message. My hand froze on the chair. I looked closer, a small, barely noticeable protrusion under the seat cushion. Fabric slightly shifted. There was something there. A recording device, microphone, camera. The entire table had gone suspiciously quiet. Callista lifted her glass in a fake toast while the rest waited, like audience members on edge for a live performance. I smiled, calmly pulled out the chair and sat, crossing my legs. My napkin unfolded over my lap with the grace of a woman who knew she was being watched. "Everything okay?" Callista asked sweetly, tilting her head. "Lovely setup," I said, matching her tone. "You always did know how to design a scene." And just like that, the room breathed again. Conversation resumed, forks clinked, and I began playing the role they had written for me, but not the way they expected. Last time we had a family brunch like this, I had mentioned my workload, and days later I heard that I was spiraling again. What I had thought was venting had been retold as unraveling. Now I scanned the room, camera in the corner, mirror angled too conveniently behind me. The lighting was soft, but calculated, like a set. Who was watching this? Just them? Or someone else? I reminded myself of what I once told my students during a lesson on Orwell. You only lose the game when you don't know you're in one. So I smiled. I nodded. I made pleasant conversation. And I memorized everything. Soraya passed me a folded napkin under the table. I opened it without raising it too high. That chair isn't the only thing rigged. And I didn't look at her, but I let the message settle in my chest like an anchor. My jaw clenched slightly. At that moment, Imogen laughed. Do you remember that time Priscilla locked herself out of the car during a thunderstorm? The story was wrong. That never happened. I had given my car keys to Callista, who then left them in her gym locker while I waited outside in the rain for nearly an hour. But of course, in Imogen's version, I was the scatterbrained one. Everyone laughed. I didn't. The realization was slow, but certain. This version of me that they retold wasn't me at all. It was a character they scripted for their benefit. One they could control, critique, and eventually discard. Dessert was brought out on antique trays, miniature tarts, glossy berries, and enough visual distraction to transition attention elsewhere. Callista raised her glass again. Hope you're comfortable, she said, eyes twinkling. That seat was chosen just for you. I raised my own glass in return. I wouldn't sit anywhere else, I replied, every word intentional. But while everyone bit into sugary sweetness, my gaze moved. The socket cover on the far wall had shifted since last time. A new lamp replaced the old one. Someone had installed a second Wi-Fi extender behind the vase. They were filming, but they hadn't written this ending. Let them record. Let them edit. Let them think they could provoke me into falling apart. They were wrong, because I wasn't here for brunch. I was here for war. The clinking of silverware continued like background percussion, while Callista leaned back in her chair, lifting her wineglass with just enough flair to draw attention. Do you all remember that little moment Priscilla had in college? Her voice floated across the table, syrupy sweet with a bitter undertone. Several heads turned. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. I didn't speak. She continued before anyone else could respond. That semester, she disappeared for 3 weeks. Everyone thought she was having a nervous breakdown. A nervous laugh from someone down the table. Didn't you dye your hair purple then, too? Another added, trying to lighten the mood. Soraya's posture straightened beside me. Her hand tightened ever so slightly around her glass. She didn't say a word, but I saw it. Her eyes narrowed just a little, the corners of her lips pressed. They weren't reminiscing, they were rewriting. I offered a flat chuckle, brushing away the implication. It wasn't 3 weeks, it was 5 days. And I was in Connecticut helping my friend whose mom had a stroke. Callista raised a brow. Oh, well, I guess we remember things differently. Another sip of wine, another calculated smile. I turned back to my plate, but I wasn't tasting anything. The room had shifted. It wasn't about sharing memories. It was about packaging a version of me, one unstable enough to be pitied but not trusted. They're not just trying to entertain, I thought. They're trying to redefine me. The breeze outside rattled a set of wind chimes by the door as Imogen stood, clearing her throat. Priscilla's always been expressive, she offered. Sensitive, you know. But that's just how she's wired. I caught the glance Soraya gave me, short, sharp. Then she looked away. What were they feeding her? What had been said before we arrived? I held my tongue, but inside, I was already charting the correction. Later, Imogen brought over a silver-haired woman I didn't recognize. This is Helen. She knew your father. Helen, this is my daughter, Callista. Oh, I mean Priscilla. Helen laughed awkwardly. You two must get that a lot. No, I replied calmly. We don't. Callista smirked behind her glass. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Soraya's brow furrowed. She leaned in slightly, her voice barely a breath. Did she just— Yes, I whispered, not moving my eyes off the table. Intentional, precise, strategic. I began counting it. Every time I was interrupted, Every story where I was the punchline, every glance exchanged that dismissed me. The mental ledger was growing. The power wasn't just in what they said. It was in who they chose to listen to, whose words they elevated, and whose they quietly diminished. I started to notice the small ways Callista controlled the room. She didn't interrupt. She tilted her head, and someone would stop speaking. She didn't insult. She asked a question that led someone else to do it for her. They took cues from her like trained actors waiting for their stage manager. When I spoke, eyes darted to Soraya first, like they were measuring her response to see if mine mattered. I wasn't being heard. I was being filtered. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate, I remembered from a lecture I gave years ago. I hadn't tolerated much before. I certainly wouldn't now. Still, I wouldn't give them the outburst they wanted. Not yet. Soraya slipped her hand under the table, gave mine a quiet squeeze. It grounded me. Not because it changed anything, but because it reminded me who I was performing for. Every word, every silence, I was cataloging it now. This brunch was no longer about food. It was deposition disguised as family gathering. My inner voice solidified. If they're recording me, they'll soon realize I've been recording them too. It wasn't paranoia. It was documentation. And the moment came after dessert, as Callista stood once more, holding her wine aloft. To family, she announced, and to those who know their place in it. There it was. No sugar this time. No subtlety. I lifted my glass slowly, locking eyes with her. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Across the table, Soraya didn't raise her glass. She looked only at me. She thinks I'm on the ropes, I thought. She forgot. I'm a teacher. I study patterns, and she's just become my subject. Imogen hadn't said much all morning. She smiled when prompted, made small talk with distant cousins, and occasionally nodded at whatever Callista said, but I could tell her mind was elsewhere. It wasn't distraction. It was avoidance. And the more I watched her, the more I realized it wasn't just awkward silence. It was practiced. Across the table, one of my cousins, a second-tier gossip in our family hierarchy, chuckled mid-bite and said, "You remember when Uncle Bill changed his will because everyone kept arguing about that lake house? Smart move. Just made it all fair. No more debate." Someone else added, "That's what Imogen did, right? With your dad's place?" I paused. My smile faltered only for a breath. It was the first time I'd heard it spoken out loud. A thing I'd long suspected now floated out into daylight, cloaked as a harmless anecdote. I looked at Imogen, expecting something, a nod, a grimace, a quick shake of the head. But she kept chewing, slowly, like the words hadn't landed on her plate. Years ago, Dad had looked me straight in the eye and said, "The house will always be yours, kiddo. That's not even a question." He wasn't dramatic, never made promises he couldn't keep, but in that moment, he meant it. Now I scanned the table again. No one else seemed to pick up on the implication. But I did. And when I glanced at Imogen again, she avoided my eyes, not out of guilt, but complicity. I waited until dessert plates were cleared and people started drifting toward the shaded patio. I walked over to where Imogen was placing a serving tray on the sideboard. "Did you really change the will?" I asked, keeping my voice soft. She didn't flinch, just sighed, pressing a napkin flat against the wood. "Things evolve, Priscilla. You don't always know what's going on behind the scenes." That wasn't a denial. "Did Callista have anything to do with it?" I asked again. She turned her head slightly. "She's handled more than you know. Your sisters kept this family upright in more ways than one." The words weren't angry. They weren't even defensive. They were resigned, and in them, I found all the confirmation I needed. I thought back to the thick envelope Callista had handed me a few years ago, asking me to sign something routine about updating records for emergency contact information. I never read it closely. I trusted the signatures at the bottom. One of them was Imogen's. Now I knew better. It wasn't just about removing me from paper. It was about removing me from the narrative. On my way back to the kitchen, I noticed something in the hallway. A framed photo from a beach trip when I was 17. I remembered the sunburn on my shoulders, the oversized sunglasses I borrowed from Callista, the way we laughed so hard we almost dropped the disposable camera into the sand. But in this photo, I wasn't there. The frame held that exact memory, but cropped. Callista, Imogen, and 2 cousins were centered perfectly. The space where I had been standing had been sliced out entirely. I moved closer, studying the cut. It wasn't accidental. It was clean, intentional, like someone had rewritten the memory with scissors. I didn't say anything. I walked into the kitchen and spotted Callista's phone propped up against the utensil holder while she made espresso. Her wallpaper. That same photo, cropped exactly the same way. The message wasn't subtle. It didn't need to be. This is the version of our family we display, one without you. It didn't burn with anger. It chilled with precision. Revisionism was more dangerous than lying, because lies fade. But edited memories? They live on in frames, in conversations, in glances that say, we remember it differently. A mentor once told me, history isn't written by the victors. It's edited by those who survive long enough to tell it differently. I thought about how many stories I used to tell at family dinners that were now dismissed as exaggerations. How many of my memories had been repackaged to serve someone else's version of truth. This brunch wasn't just food and fake smiles. It was an archive. And I was no longer a curator. I was the redacted footnote. But no more. I turned inward, not retreating but analyzing, like I would a case study, a classroom debate. I stopped responding emotionally and started tracking behavior. Every time my comment was ignored, every time someone cut across my sentence, every time I was framed as dramatic or sensitive while Callista's dry wit passed for strength. This wasn't about changing their minds anymore. It was about protecting myself from their lens. I wasn't playing to win them over. I was building a firewall. After brunch, I'd be calling my friend Sarah, an estate lawyer. I'd ask for a quiet look at any legal documents my name might have touched, and I'd begin building my own archive. No one would erase me again without resistance. Outside, I smiled, not because I was calm, but because I had a purpose. If I can't win their game, I thought, I'll change the arena. A few minutes later, everyone started gathering near the backyard arbor for family photos. The golden light bounced off wine glasses and smiling faces. Callista turned, one hand resting on her hip. Let's keep it just the immediate family, she said, then caught my eye and held it, a challenge wrapped in sweetness. I stepped forward, walking past the photographer who was adjusting the lens. I'll take it, I said, grabbing the camera. You'll want it in focus. No one objected. Callista didn't move. The cousins froze. I lifted the camera, composed the shot, and clicked the shutter. Their smiles were perfect. Without me, let them keep the picture. I'd keep the proof they needed me gone to make it perfect. The brunch began to dissolve the way parties do when the performance is over. People peeled away from the table in pairs, hovering around the mimosa bar or wandering into the garden in little clusters. The food was gone, the plates cleared, but something still lingered in the air. A tension that hadn't found its landing spot yet. It hovered like the smell of expensive citrus and lavender candles, cloying and sweet. Callista was all relaxed now, or pretending to be. Her posture loose, her voice warmer than it had been all morning. She moved through the guests like a hostess who believed she'd nailed every detail. And maybe she had. Maybe everything had gone according to her plan. Soraya was pulled aside by Aunt Cheryl, something about helping rearrange the drink table. She gave me a quick glance before being whisked away, leaving me standing near the garden arch with a half-empty glass of sparkling water and too many questions humming in my chest. That's when I noticed Callista leaning in toward Imogen, her voice low and conspiratorial. Imogen's nod was slight but deliberate. Their eyes met briefly, then split in opposite directions. They were planting something again. They plant seeds not with shouts, but with smiles, I thought. I needed a breather. I excused myself toward the powder room, mostly to escape the feeling of being watched. But as I circled back through the hallway, I caught sight of Soraya in the garden, standing alone at first, until Callista joined her. I couldn't hear them. I could only watch. Callista's hands moved in calm gestures, almost comforting. Soraya's body stiffened at first, then loosened. Her arms crossed, then dropped. They spoke for what must have been 5 minutes, then parted with an embrace that looked too polished to be spontaneous. When I returned to the yard, Soraya had resumed her place beside me, but she felt off. "You okay?" I asked quietly. She gave a small smile, one that didn't fully lift. "Just a weird story from your sister. Nothing important." It wasn't just her words. It was the sudden distance in them. The subtle space she'd placed between us without moving an inch. 10 minutes later, I overheard Soraya asking Uncle Larry, "Did Priscilla really have to be hospitalized once?" My stomach tightened. My hands went cold. It wasn't confusion. It was infection. Callista had begun the campaign, and she hadn't wasted a second. Later, I retraced Soraya's steps. I found a quiet path around the edge of the garden, looping behind the arch where Callista had cornered her earlier. The hydrangeas hid me well enough, and what I heard confirmed everything I feared. "She's not unstable," Callista was saying. "She's just overwhelmed. We all worry. We just want Soraya to see the truth before it's too late." Another voice, Aunt Dana, I think, sighed. "Well, some people aren't meant for all that responsibility." She always seemed a little much. They were laying it thick, lacing sympathy with sabotage. I stepped back slowly, unseen. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I calculated. This wasn't just betrayal. It was branding. They were carving a narrative and nailing it to my name, crafting a persona that would stick in every future conversation about me. Back on the patio, I sat down with a group of second cousins, commenting on the garden, complimenting the food, asking polite questions. My tone even, my energy light, my presence controlled. Soraya watched me from across the yard, her face unreadable, but she was watching, and I needed her to see something different from what they'd planted. I remembered a line from a former mentor. "The strongest response to manipulation is control over your own image." So I chose not to confront, not yet. Instead, I shook hands. I poured wine. I told stories that revealed who I really was, without explicitly contradicting anyone else. They wanted a show of imbalance. I gave them elegance, let them struggle with the dissonance. Soraya approached later, holding her glass with both hands. "I didn't know you painted," she said softly. "I used to," I replied. "Back when I still believed I could hang something in this house and not have it replaced." She didn't respond, but she stayed next to me longer than she needed to. In the past, I might have snapped, defended myself, demanded loyalty. Now, I was smarter. I sat still and took mental notes, names, phrases, expressions. Falsehoods always carried their own breadcrumb trail if you knew how to look. I wasn't quiet because I was weak. I was quiet because I was preparing. They thought silence meant surrender. It meant I was gathering leverage. Later, Callista approached with her practiced charm. "Glass of red?" she offered. "You look like you could use one. I know today's been overwhelming." She handed me the stemmed glass like it was an award. I accepted it with grace, held it up to the sunlight, watching the liquid swirl. "Funny," I said, my voice soft, deliberate. "How poison's always served in something elegant." She blinked, just once. The smile on her face tightened, held in place like porcelain. I took a sip, smiled wider. "I hope she's still recording," I thought. "Because this part won't need editing." Zinnia was playing with plastic cups near the foot of the patio stairs, stacking them like building blocks. I was helping clear plates from the outdoor table, weaving through half-standing relatives still locked in their low-stakes conversations. The party was thinning, but not dissolving. I bent down to grab a stray fork when I heard it. "Remember, Mom said pretend Aunt Priscilla is mean today." Like last night? Zinnia's voice rang clear as a bell. Too loud. Too honest. Silence fell. Plates stopped clinking. A cousin froze mid-sip. Someone cleared their throat and reached for a napkin. Callista, who had just emerged with another pitcher of sangria, snapped her head toward the sound. "Oh, honey," she said too quickly, too brightly. "Let's not repeat everything Mommy says at home, okay?" She gave a tight laugh, waving her hand like it was adorable, then pulled Zinnia up by the wrist and ushered her toward the house. But it had already landed. I looked across the yard at Soraya. As she looked at me, confused, then back toward Callista, her eyebrows furrowed. That sentence, out of a child's mouth, cut through all the perfectly arranged furniture and floral centerpieces. Kids don't lie, not like that, not unless someone teaches them how. A few minutes later, I pulled Soraya aside under the trellis near the koi pond. The hum of the backyard buzz faded behind us as I repeated Zinnia's words to her slowly, letting the full weight sink in. Soraya sighed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "She's a kid, Priscilla. Maybe she misunderstood." She didn't misunderstand. She remembered. My voice didn't waver. They're scripting a breakdown, one they can narrate and control, and now they're rehearsing it through her. Soraya didn't respond. "Not right away," I added. "Do you remember last week when Zinnia asked if I still take pills that make me act normal?" I laughed it off, thought it was just a kid being nosy. She inhaled sharply. "Now tell me she came up with that on her own." Still, silence. We stood there a long time, just the two of us. Soraya wasn't defending Callista anymore, but she wasn't defending me either. That in-between space said more than words. I turned back toward the kitchen, needed something to ground me. I entered through the back door, where the hum of the refrigerator seemed louder in the hush of the empty room. There, just beside the trash bin, the lid propped slightly open, was a glimpse of white paper. I knew that paper. I had folded it neatly that morning, taped it to the fridge with a small magnet shaped like a red apple. I leaned in and pulled it out. My note. "Thank you for including me. I hope today is healing for all of us." Still folded. Unread. Tossed away like a food wrapper. The ink blurred slightly where condensation from the fridge had touched the edge. But my handwriting remained. Small, soft, hopeful. They hadn't forgotten it. They had thrown it out. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was malice, repackaged in mimosas and matching napkins. I folded the note again, this time with clinical precision, and slipped it into my bag. I wasn't hurt. I was done. When I stepped outside again, the mood had shifted. People were standing in little circles, some holding small plates of pastries, others just pretending to be occupied. Uncle Charles said, "You know, Priscilla, you always had that fiery streak. It keeps things interesting." I stepped into the circle with a smile so measured, it cut. "I used to think I was moody," I said. "Then I realized being misrepresented makes anyone look unstable." A few chuckles, a nervous sip from someone's wine. Callista's eyes narrowed. "I used to write letters," I added, pulling out the folded note. "Now I speak plainly. No shouting, no drama. Just edge, sharpened by years of suppression. I'm not here for approval. I'm here because I was invited. But if you were hoping I'd lose it, cry, storm off, you'll have to settle for disappointment." That silenced the last murmurs. I walked away, not dramatically, just purposefully. I ended up near the front porch, alone. The air felt different here, less staged. Why did I come today? Not for closure, not even for connection. I came because I was tired of being erased. I remembered something Soraya once told me back when we first started dating. You don't owe anyone a version of yourself that keeps them comfortable. That's what I had been doing, making myself smaller, simpler, more palatable, no more. If they wanted to humiliate me, I thought, they'll be disappointed. I don't humiliate. I outgrow. I returned to the patio like I had always belonged there, not with arrogance but authority, like the kind you wear after surviving a fire. Later, as the sun started leaning toward late afternoon, Soraya found me alone again. She didn't speak at first, just stood next to me, hands in the pockets of her linen dress. I turned to her and asked quietly, "If they lied about this, what else do you think they've rewritten?" She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Her silence wasn't cluelessness, it was acknowledgement. I didn't press. I simply turned toward the yard, standing tall, letting the breeze wash over me. Let them record everything. My truth doesn't need a second take. I should have known Callista wasn't done. Not after the rehearsed smiles, the curated toasts, or the subtle digs. No, there was always a finale with her. And true to form, just as some guests were wandering back to the patio with refilled glasses and crumbs of dessert on their napkins, she stood and clinked her spoon gently against her wine glass. "Before anyone runs off," she called out cheerfully, "I thought we'd end with something fun, a little family appreciation montage." The way she said it, light, breezy, but sharp at the edges, put me instantly on alert. A few guests perked up, clearly caught off guard. I wasn't the only one. "Oh, how sweet," someone muttered from the back. "We'll just head inside real quick," Callista added, motioning toward the living room where the curtains had been drawn and a massive flat-screen TV now glowed with a paused slideshow menu. As we walked in, I felt Soraya's hand find mine for the first time all day. She didn't say anything, but her grip said enough. Tension hung between us like a rope that had been pulled too tight. "Sit up front, Priscilla," Callista chirped, already moving to the corner near the remote. "You'll want a good view." My stomach twisted. This wasn't a celebration. This was a stage, and I was being framed. If this is the moment they've staged, I thought, I need to choose my response, not react. The slideshow started innocently enough. Old photos flicked across the screen. Birthdays, graduations, blurry beach trips from childhood. I saw my younger self once or twice, but only in the background. Callista was front and center in nearly every shot. And then, without transition, the screen went black. A shaky video began to play. It was me, disheveled, flustered, my voice raised, my hands animated. A moment of frustration mid-conversation, captured through a phone's lens without my knowledge. I recognized the setting. My kitchen. The day I had fought with Callista over an inheritance document she never showed me. The audio had been tampered with, slightly louder, with moments looped to appear more erratic. Context completely stripped. Gasps. A few stunned blinks. "She's always been intense," I heard someone whisper behind me. I didn't flinch. My back stayed straight. My face didn't move. They wanted a reaction. I gave them stillness. The clip ended abruptly. Silence followed. Not heavy enough to feel like empathy, just awkward enough to suggest everyone was reevaluating me, quietly. Then the fake praise began. "You've come so far," a cousin said with a hesitant smile. "You seem more grounded now." "Glad you're getting the help you needed," added another. "Seriously, you're glowing." I smiled. "I am grounded," I said evenly, "because the storm passed, not because you saved me from it." That wiped the smiles. I met each of their eyes, slowly, one by one. It didn't matter if they clapped at the end of the slideshow. They had already made their judgments before they saw it. But I wasn't here for applause. I was here to remind them that I could still speak. "I used to think defending myself meant yelling louder," I said quietly, addressing no one and everyone. "Now I know silence works just as well, when it's laced with truth." I scanned the room again. Callista stood motionless near the window. Soraya, sitting at my side, looked stunned, not by the video, but by me. Funny how none of them asked where the video came from. Funny how no one questioned whether it was edited, because they didn't care about truth, they only cared about confirmation. Funny, I added, how everyone recognizes me in that clip, but not when I'm quietly asking to be heard. The air snapped. Nobody knew what to say. I didn't offer a lifeline. I got up slowly, walked toward the kitchen again, every step deliberate. This time, I wasn't retreating, I was calculating. I needed to start building a case, quietly, carefully. I needed a tech person, someone who could retrieve deleted files, old backups, unedited clips. I wanted every version of that video, because if they thought this was over, they'd misread the genre. I was just starting the next act. Eleanor Roosevelt's voice echoed in my mind. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. I wouldn't resist their narrative. I'd replace it. Later, as people pretended to carry on with small talk, I noticed Soraya still staring at the blank screen, as if trying to unsee what had just been shown. As the slideshow concluded, one last image flashed across the screen. White text on a black background. Some people never change. I laughed, not loudly, just under my breath. Then I leaned toward Callista, still holding the wine glass she hadn't sipped once. You're right, I whispered. Some of us just evolve beyond recognition. I walked out of the room, not because I couldn't stay, but because they couldn't handle me sitting there anymore. They wanted to show everyone my worst, I thought, but I just showed them their limits. I slipped out to the side porch when no one was looking, the air still clinging to the scent of champagne and cut hydrangeas. My fingers scrolled through the Notes app on my phone, tapping in words, names, details. I wasn't journaling, I was documenting. The tone someone used when they spoke my name, the pause after a story I corrected, how often I was left out of conversations I should have been centered in. Everything mattered now. In toxic spaces, silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. That's what my therapist once told me. I hadn't understood it then. I did now. My phone buzzed. Soraya. Come back. Callista's doing another thank you toast. Of course she was. I took a breath and stood, brushing invisible lint from my skirt. Perfect timing. When I walked back in, Callista was already facing the group, arms open in faux humility. I just wanted to take a moment to thank everyone who made today so special, she began, her tone sugary with a twist of steel. I didn't return to my seat. Instead, I stood off to the side, arms crossed, my eyes steady. She began listing names. Imogen, our cousins, even the florist, everyone except me. Not once did her gaze flicker in my direction. It was deliberate. I didn't flinch. I raised my glass. The room felt it, the shift. No one said a word, but glances moved like ripples on water. They expected me to demand acknowledgement. I didn't. I gave them something worse. I let my silence speak. I didn't perform gratitude. I stood there and made them live in their discomfort. Callista faltered, just for a second, before wrapping up. It's been a lovely day, really. She turned, trying to laugh, but it fell flat. Soraya caught my eye. Her face said everything. Later, a guest wandered up to admire the display in the entryway. Floral centerpieces, vintage silver trays, and an ornate crystal vase holding ivory lilies. This is gorgeous, she said. Where'd it come from? Oh, I brought that back from Paris last fall, Callista said without hesitation, beaming. I blinked. That vase wasn't from Paris. It was from me, a birthday gift for our mother last year, wrapped, hand-delivered, and signed. Soraya turned slightly and leaned toward me. That was yours, wasn't it? I nodded once, but I didn't correct Callista, not out loud. Instead, I opened my Notes app again. Narrative control equals control of legacy. Note pattern of ownership transfer. They weren't just stealing objects, they were stealing authorship. A conversation in the dining room veered into family heirlooms. Callista held court effortlessly, assigning origins and meanings to every item we ever fought over. Remember that summer at Lake Crescent? She asked. We nearly capsized the canoe. That wasn't you, I said lightly. That was me and Dad. Callista smiled, eyes sharp. Oh, right. I forget. You always remember things so dramatically. Laughter followed. Not cruel, but complicit. I tried again. No, really. I have the photo. Dad's holding the oar. You weren't even there that trip. Callista waved her hand. Doesn't matter. Point is, we've had such good times, haven't we? Soraya didn't laugh. Neither did I. They're not telling stories, I thought. They're building evidence against my voice. So I stopped correcting. I waited, then picked my moment. A cousin brought up a memory from high school, something about a school play. You were in that one, right? She asked me. I nodded. Yeah, I played the lawyer in 12 Angry Men. Callista jumped in. No, you were the secretary. I remember the clipboard. No, I said gently. I was the lawyer. It was the first time they let a girl take a male lead. It mattered. The room quieted. I teach now, I continued. Bias is built into how we remember things. It's fascinating, watching it play out in real time. My voice stayed calm, even disarming. Callista's smirk dimmed. Imogen looked down. Soraya stared. The power shifted, almost imperceptibly, but I felt it. As guests gathered near the door for polite goodbyes, Aunt Carol hugged me tightly. You handled that with grace, she whispered, more than I could. I smiled, warmth filling me just enough to register. Thank you. From across the room, Callista called out. Don't forget your vase. Oh, wait, never mind. I turned, met her eyes, smiled, razor thin. You'll need it more than I ever did, I said smoothly. Then I walked to the front steps, my heels quiet against the wood floor, each step measured. You don't need to scream to win, I thought. You just need them to hear you even when you're silent. Callista stood by the patio doors, her glass lifted like she was addressing the press, not our relatives. Before everyone heads out, I just want to say how much it's meant to have you all here today, she beamed. I know life pulls us in different directions, but family is our anchor. Guests shuffled closer, encircling her like a flock waiting for the final breadcrumbs. Soraya stood near me, still stiff from our last exchange. I caught Imogen to my right, wine in hand, face placid. And of course, Callista continued, I wouldn't be who I am without the people who shaped me. My mother, whose strength defines us, and the love of this family, which inspires me every day. She glanced around dramatically, to the bonds that last. Imogen cleared her throat, nudged forward by Callista. Well, Imogen started slowly, as the matriarch here, it's a joy to see my family thriving, especially Callista, who's taken on so much, with such grace. That was it. No mention of me. Not a syllable. It wasn't oversight. It was burial. They're not just hosting, I thought. They're eulogizing my place here. Before I could step away, Soraya leaned in and whispered, I checked the paperwork like you asked. My stomach clenched. She pulled her phone from her pocket, tapping to a photo. A scanned copy of the property transfer for the cottage Grandma had left me. The signature at the bottom? Mine. Except I never signed it. And that, she whispered tightly, is your mom's signature as witness. My knees nearly buckled. They hadn't just excluded me. They'd erased me, and they'd done it legally. I blinked, stepping back, the backyard spinning slightly around me. Clinks of cutlery and polite laughter distorted like echoes underwater. It was a slow-motion ambush dressed up as a Sunday brunch. I made my way to the far corner of the patio, hoping for a few seconds to process. I barely noticed Zinnia tugging at Soraya's sleeve nearby until her voice cut through the air. Is Priscilla your friend? She asked brightly. Or just someone you have to be nice to? Every voice went quiet. The breeze stopped. Callista forced a light laugh. Zin, that's not a kind question. Zinnia blinked, unbothered. But you said last night she'd cry if she felt left out. Soraya froze, jaw tightening. I didn't move. I didn't blink. Because there it was, laid bare from the mouth of a child. Even the next generation was being trained to erase me. Something inside me cracked, not in a way that broke, but in a way that broke through. I put down my wine glass. I used to think family was where you belonged, I said, my voice calm but clear. Now I know it's where you're kept, until you stop being convenient. Callista opened her mouth. Save it, I snapped, holding up my hand. You rehearsed this moment. I didn't. I turned to Imogen. I saw the signature. You were the witness. She flinched, just enough. A few people stepped back. The illusion of harmony began to crumble. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply walked to the patio edge, each step steady. They didn't stop me. They just watched, silent, stunned, not with shame, but with a new understanding. They'd orchestrated everything to humiliate me, and I'd dismantled it in a single, unbroken truth. Out on the patio rail, I stood and inhaled. The mountain air was sharp, cleansing. The sky, unlike the people behind me, was honest. They tried to break me, I thought, but I was never part of what they built. I just stopped pretending. I remembered something Toni Morrison once said. If you want to fly, you've got to give up the shit that weighs you down. I removed my earrings, the pair Callista gave me years ago after I dropped out of grad school. They were supposed to be a gesture of reconciliation. In hindsight, they were a reminder of what she could still control. I set them on the railing and walked away. I didn't flinch. I didn't look back. This wasn't retreat. It was release. As the guests trickled toward the driveway, murmuring goodbyes with awkward smiles, Soraya caught up to me at the edge of the lawn. I found it, she said quietly. The original contract. They changed it 2 years ago. I looked at her, not surprised. And you waited until now? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I walked toward my car, the grass crisp under my heels. I didn't lose my family, I thought. I just finally saw who was never in it to begin with. The guests began slipping out in small clusters, murmuring vague goodbyes, making excuses about errands, traffic, or early flights. The artificial warmth that had coated the earlier part of the day was gone, peeled back like paint in the sun. Now, what lingered was quiet recognition. Not apologies, no one dared that much, but subtle nods, averted eyes, half smiles that looked more like winces. Callista stayed hidden in the kitchen. Imogen emerged, still sipping her wine like nothing had detonated just feet from her carefully arranged dessert table. She gave me a pat on the shoulder on her way out. Thanks for coming, sweetheart. Let's do this again soon. I didn't reply. Soraya lingered, hovering near the patio, trying to make light conversation about the weather, of all things. But she couldn't hold my gaze. I was about to head to the car when my phone buzzed. A voice memo. The preview read, "It's time." I couldn't hold it in anymore. I tapped play. Aminta's voice filled my ear, soft, shaken. Priscilla, I know I should have told you earlier, but I was scared. They promised me money, and I needed it. But I kept everything, the recordings, the notes. The day they signed the change to the will, Callista and your mother, they talked about how to get Soraya to see you as unstable, said it had to be subtle, had to be slow. My hand didn't tremble. My breath didn't catch. I'd expected betrayal, but having it confirmed in someone else's voice, it wasn't pain, it was validation. I'm sending you copies, Aminta continued. Do what you need to. I'm sorry for being part of it, even in silence. I saved the file, forwarded it to my attorney. Then I locked my phone and walked toward the front hallway, head high. But as I reached for my bag, a whisper broke behind me. They found her purse. In the men's room. It came from the corner, hushed but not hidden. A setup. My purse had been on the bench. I always left it there, neatly zipped beneath my coat. Now someone had placed it where it didn't belong, to hint at a scene, to question my judgment. A cousin looked concerned. Do you want me to walk you? I didn't answer. I turned, walked calmly down the hallway, and opened the men's room door myself. There it was. sitting neatly on the sink. I picked it up, turned back to the hallway, and stepped into the silence. Interesting, I said, making sure they all heard me. How personal property travels without its owner these days. Nobody laughed. Nobody corrected me. They knew. Outside, I found Soraya near the curb. She looked up when I approached, her face drawn in a way I hadn't seen before. I should have told you sooner, she said. I waited. I saw some things, emails, voice notes, but I didn't want to believe it. I thought maybe you were reading into it too much. If I hadn't caught it today, I asked, would you have ever told me? Her silence said everything. Eventually, she nodded. You were manipulated too, I said, but your silence let it happen. She didn't argue. I forgive you, I added, but don't expect me to forget. A beat passed. Next time, I said, believe the woman before she's forced to perform proof. I walked past her, not to leave her behind, but because she needed to see I could walk ahead without asking permission. That was the first step. Back at home, I opened my laptop and pulled up every note I'd taken since the invitations were sent. I started building a timeline, events, emails, comments, that edited video. The day they changed the will, this wasn't about winning their respect anymore. It was about making sure they never did this to me or anyone else again. Legacy wasn't what they said about you over appetizers. It was what you stood for after you left the room. I'd stopped needing to be invited back. Now, I was building something they couldn't touch. They showed me who they were, I said aloud, and I believed them. I remembered Maya Angelou. Her words fit like armor. As the sky dimmed outside, I uploaded Aminta's recording and my own short voice memo to a private cloud folder. No dramatic captions, just a plain screen with one line of text. Family is not an alibi. The truth deserves airtime. I closed the lid, and in the reflection of the screen, I saw something new, strength without noise. They built a stage. I just changed the script. The sun had barely reached its peak when I opened my eyes, my body sore from tension, not sleep. I lay still for a moment, letting the weight of yesterday settle into my skin. A slow buzz on my nightstand pulled me out of the haze, text after text, notification after notification blinking across the screen. Some were kind, some neutral. Others were silent withdrawals, phone numbers I knew too well disappearing from group chats. Not a single message from Callista. Imogen had sent a photo of a hydrangea centerpiece with the caption, "Leftovers from a perfect day." I made coffee the way I always did, black, strong, steady. Then I opened the fridge. There it sat, my untouched casserole, tightly covered in foil, neatly pushed to the back behind store-bought quiches and 3 types of juice no one had touched. I remembered Callista's voice from the day before. It didn't really fit the table aesthetic. She'd told the staff to put it away, out of sight, out of story. I stood there for a full minute, hand resting on the cool glass shelf. Even what I created was too much for their curated version of us. I peeled back the foil. The dish looked perfect, still warm in some pockets from the ride there. I'd spent 3 hours the night before baking it from scratch. Family recipe, one Grandma used to make every Thanksgiving. She would have cursed Callista under her breath for that level of pettiness. I took a picture of the casserole and sent it to Soraya with a short message. Funny what's left behind when truth surfaces. She replied almost instantly. They were always afraid of you showing up fully. No denial, no excuse, just honesty. The metaphor burned its way through me. I walked to my desk, opened the folder I'd been updating, and tapped out one final note. Then I opened the family group chat. I didn't hesitate. I attached 3 files, the original footage of my supposed breakdown, the audio from Aminta confessing the forged will, and a short letter that read, "You wanted evidence. Now you have it. Save your apologies. I've moved on." I pressed send. 15 minutes passed. Silence. Then the typing dots. Then waves of reaction. Aunt Cheryl messaged privately. I had no idea. I'm ashamed. Uncle Greg wrote, I always wondered why things didn't add up. Thank you for your courage. Callista left the group chat without a word. Imogen said nothing. I didn't respond. Some messages aren't meant to start new conversations. They're meant to end old ones. Later that morning, I received an email from Lauren, my college roommate, now a lawyer. If you want to pursue legal steps, I'm ready, no charge. My former student, Julia, sent a longer message. You taught me how to read between the lines. Yesterday you modeled it in real life. Thank you. I read that one twice. Funny how strangers sometimes hold your truth better than the people who claim to raise you. I picked up my journal and flipped to the week's page. At the top, in bold, I wrote, If you were silenced, it means your voice mattered. I stared at it for a beat, then nodded to myself. This wasn't vindication in the traditional sense, no court ruling, no public apology, but it was mine. I revisited my goals. Maybe I'd teach again, or create a workshop about navigating trauma, rewriting internal narratives. Turn that pain into curriculum. The word sensitive used to feel like a curse. Now I saw it for what it was, a superpower, a radar, a reminder that what they labeled as fragility was often just unfiltered perception. I looked at the casserole again, still sitting open on the counter. If they didn't want what I brought, maybe someone else did. I packed it carefully into a carrier and scribbled a quick note for the women's shelter down the street. If they won't eat what I bring, I told myself, I'll feed someone who's starving for it. Just as I grabbed my coat, a knock came at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it. Soraya stood there. Her face looked tired, not from lack of sleep, but from carrying something unspoken too long. I know I said I needed time, she said, but I found something else, and you need to see it. My hand clenched tighter around the handle of the casserole tray. I didn't answer. Not yet. I thought the storm passed, I thought. Turns out, the aftershock hasn't even begun. I sat by the window, watching traffic crawl beneath the late afternoon sun. The light hit the floor in golden angles, the way it does when a day's finally begun to exhale. My phone was face down on the coffee table, buzzing intermittently with unread messages. I didn't rush to check them. I wasn't ready, not to respond, not to feel. I opened the legal folder that had been sitting unopened since the day after Grandma's funeral. Scanned the signature that wasn't mine, the ones that were, then closed it again. It wasn't the paperwork I wasn't ready for. It was what it symbolized, the quiet betrayal, the silence that let it pass. People always talk about what was done to you, but no one talks about the people who watched it happen. I repeated something I'd read days ago. Closure doesn't mean justice. Sometimes it's just peace. I didn't want to win against them anymore. I just wanted to live without them. Soraya texted. She was downstairs. We walked in silence for a few blocks before ending up at a cafe on Pearl Street. It wasn't the kind of place you talk about heartbreak. It was the kind of place you talk about real estate and startup investments. But we sat there anyway. Coffee, not wine. Real, not safe. I should have listened sooner, Soraya said. I think I was afraid you were right. I didn't interrupt. I didn't comfort her. I just listened. And when she finally looked at me, I asked, would it have changed anything if I'd screamed louder? She hesitated, then shook her head. Probably not. I nodded. I don't hate you, I said, carefully. But I'm done trying to be the version of me that people can tolerate. She swallowed. Her eyes glistened, but didn't spill. We finished our coffee quietly. When we stood to leave, she hugged me. Long, solid, but without promises. Back home, my phone showed a missed call. Voicemail from Imogen. I played it twice. I don't know how things spiraled like this. I hope one day you'll understand I was trying to keep peace. No apology. Not even close. I texted back, "Peace isn't silence, it's truth." I didn't expect a reply, and I didn't need one. Something shifted in me then. The part of me that had been waiting, holding space for words that would never come, finally went quiet. Not broken, just complete. Later, I pulled out my journal and flipped to a blank page. I'd highlighted a quote earlier that morning from Glennon Doyle. "You can't be brave and safe at the same time." I wrote 2 lists. What I'd lost: inheritance, approval, illusions. What I'd gained: clarity, boundaries, and a version of myself that no one could twist. Healing, I'd learned, wasn't a straight path. It moved like water, sometimes stinging, sometimes soft, but always carving its way forward. I wrote my first full line on the page. "I am not what they said I was. I am who I survived to become." I exhaled. And then I signed up for a seminar. Family Trauma and Systems Psychology. Not as a patient, as a guest speaker. A colleague from my teaching days had reached out. She wanted to co-create a program for women navigating family-based gaslighting and erasure. It felt like the first thing in weeks that wasn't tied to survival, but to contribution. I opened my email and finally replied to Lauren, my attorney friend. No, I wouldn't be pursuing the will. But yes, I wanted protections in place, not to fight them, to make sure no one else ever did this to me again. I opened a new folder on my desktop, Proof of Me. Inside it, I placed Aminta's recording, photos, screenshots, audio, dates, emails, my voice. I wasn't here to scream anymore. I was here to document. I used to want a seat at their table, I thought. Now I'm building my own. Just as I was packing up the casserole for the shelter down the street, a knock came at the door. Unexpected. I opened it. Soraya stood there, pale, hands tucked into her coat pockets. "I know I said I needed time," she began, "but I found something else, and you need to see it." In her hand was a manila envelope. Before I could respond, another knock echoed behind her. A courier. He handed me a small brown box. No return address. I opened it slowly. Inside, a photo. The family beach trip. But this time, uncut. I was there. Arms open, laughing, untouched by edits. A sticky note lay atop it. "It was never about you not belonging. It was about us not being ready." No name, no apology, just a revision. I held the picture up to the light. Regret is not restoration, I thought, but it's where some things start to unravel. I met Lauren, my attorney, in a small office 2 blocks from downtown. There was nothing dramatic about the space: white walls, beige carpet, framed diplomas, but what we did inside it changed everything. "I'm ready," I told her. "Not to win, just to correct the record." She nodded, handed me the pen, and I signed. The official challenge to the will was filed. Callista was served at a networking luncheon later that afternoon. According to Lauren's assistant, the server handed her the envelope between her keynote and the champagne toast. Right there, on her stage, Imogen called within the hour. I watched the screen light up, let it ring, and let it go. I didn't need that conversation. I didn't do this to win, I whispered to myself. I did it to stop letting them rewrite me. A few nights later, I took the mic at a local fundraiser, one Callista used to host every year. This time, she was nowhere to be found. But Soraya was there, seated near the front. We didn't speak before it started. We didn't need to. The room was full, mostly women, mostly silent, waiting. "I want to talk," I began, "about the kind of silence that doesn't look like silence. The silence that happens in kitchens and courtrooms and group chats. The kind that isn't peace, but captivity." I didn't name anyone. I didn't need to. Every woman in the room had seen a version of this, and the rest had lived it. They clapped when I finished. Not because I'd said something extraordinary, but because I hadn't flinched while saying it. Backstage, someone from the shelter approached me, eyes wet. "You made a lot of people feel visible today." I thanked her and meant it. Later, Lauren told me we had a solid case if I wanted to pursue financial restitution, but I had another idea. "The cottage?" I asked. "Can we donate it to the women's advocacy shelter?" She blinked. "Legally? Yes. Morally? That would hit." "Good." Imogen's outrage came through Soraya, who texted, "Your mother is livid." I replied, "Let her be. I'd rather that house shelter someone escaping abuse than trap me in a family name." That decision spoke louder than anything they'd scripted. I signed documents that dissolved my legal ties to every family asset. No settlements, no splits, just a clean severance, public and deliberate. And then I wrote letters, not emails, not calls, typed, printed, signed. Each family member received one. "You no longer get to narrate my story. Thank you for proving that I never needed your approval to survive." I sent one to Soraya too. Hers had a second note inside. "People don't fail us. We fail when we ignore who they've always been." Imogen didn't reply. Callista posted a quote on Instagram about forgiveness and self-worth. I didn't even click view. Sometimes silence is power. This time, I owned the volume. By spring, I opened a trauma-informed storytelling workshop in the library annex. Our first class, unedited, your life, your voice, unapologetically. I wore a simple dress and a new ring, not for marriage, but to mark the day I unchained myself. I turned down all interviews. This wasn't content, it was consequence. Healing isn't forgetting, I told the room. It's outgrowing what no longer fits. My final act wasn't grand. It was measured, intentional, lived. Weeks passed, and then, one Sunday afternoon, my phone rang. Imogen. I let it ring, then let it go. I didn't block her, but I didn't save the number either. Some chapters you don't close with a period. You just stop rereading them. I stepped outside. The Colorado sun met my skin like a promise, and I walked forward, without apology, without fear,